Good morning and welcome back to A Novel Lunch. I am very excited to bring to you today a very dear friend of mine, Miss Shelby Dennis. Shelby, welcome to A Novel Lunch. Please let
Thank
us know who you are and what you write and how we met. Just kind of listeners in on our secrets.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. I'm glad that we finally get to do this. I'm Shelby, and I got started as a hairdresser, actually. I've worked in the beauty industry now for a little bit over 15 years. And throughout that entire time, I found that work very fulfilling. But people have always told me, wow, you should write. And I think that that's a common refrain for a lot of people listening today. People in our lives tell us you should write, but we think that we need, a memoir if we're going to be writing nonfiction in order to make it work, or an idea for a novel if we're going to be writing fiction. And that's kind of what held me up for a really long time, was that idea that I needed the core of a novel or a memoir. But then 2020 happened, and at least where I live, hair salons were completely shut down due to the pandemic. That, combined with some health issues like the early onset carpal tunnel, made me realize I needed to do this for real, take this seriously, and see if I could make this writing thing happen. And so I've been moving since then. I actually do writing for most of my work now. I've transitioned into what's called copywriting, which is where I write, blogs, emails for beauty businesses and hair care brands. And when I realized that, like, wait, you can get paid to write nonfiction in a way that doesn't have to be a memoir, opens so many doors for me. And so that's what I'm really excited to be sharing today, is not, how to get started in copywriting, of course, but how to find maybe little known avenues to explore writing. I think that's such an exciting idea.
Oh, it is an exciting idea. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing it. So you do copywriting now and you have a business, right?
Yeah, exactly. So right now, what I do full time is essentially the copywriting. I do still maintain my cosmetologist license because it's very helpful for a lot of the work that I do. But every single day, what I'm doing is sitting down and writing these things for people, whether it's an article for their website or a brochure for a convention they're going to. And it calls for a lot of creativity because you want that to be fun when you read it, right? No one wants to read a boring article or brochure.
Right, right. Yeah, well, creative writing, creative nonfiction, it still should be creative. I mean, it should read like a fiction story or, you don't want just the facts. You don't want it to be that cut and dry. So I'm excited that we're talking because I recently did a little video on nonfiction writing tips. So I think this is great. This will fit right in with that. But don't you coach writers?
I do, yeah, I've gotten into that in the past couple of years as well. I've realized that so many people have the same kind of mental block as me, where they think, "I can only do it this one way, and I don't have my idea for my memoir, and so that's it." And I want more people to know that copywriting is a thing, that you can sit down to write and get paid for it by clients every single day and still have time to work on whatever your passions are, whether that is a novel or a memoir or something else entirely different on the creative spectrum. And so I do one-on-one coaching, and I run a school community as well, which is just like a little private community with courses and all kinds of things to help people get started on this path.
Wonderful. Well, we'll definitely have that information in the show notes for our listeners to go look you up and connect with you. So, would you happen to have a couple of tips or tricks to find copywriting clients? Maybe to schedule your day. How do you go about scheduling your day? Do you How do you balance work life, family balance with? Because I know me, when I'm home, I work and I may work, normally I work till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Sometimes I work later. Sometimes, like if it's bad weather and I'm not walking in the mornings, then I'll work even longer than that. Now I do balance that by taking some time off. I shut down early. I get completely away from writing for several hours a day. So give us some tips and tricks on how you handle all of that with your writing.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I find is, I've been doing this writing for going on 5 or 6 years now, and still sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going to start writing now it's easier than it was when I was brand new for sure. But you've got so many things going on in your life at any given time that you can't keep that mentality of, oh, I'm just going to take care of everything in my life and then I'll find time for writing. I had to let go of that very early on. And so I structure my days now a little bit differently than I think you might picture a typical workday. The advice that I always hear is start with the thing each day that is the biggest and hardest. Whatever you're dreading, whatever you're really just like, I have to do that today. Do that
Mhm.
first and get it out of the way. That works great for some people, but for me, I would just sit and procrastinate and not do it. And so I flipped the script and now I start with a small win each day. I find something very quick, simple, and usually fun or exciting for me. So that can be editing something from the previous day. It can be checking in with other writer friends and just sending off a quick update email. It doesn't have to be something that is going to turn into paying work to start your day. I find that when I start with something small and fun, it gets so much easier to do whatever the
Mm.
big thing each day is.
Yeah, that sounds really smart. I hadn't heard that before. I'm gonna have to sneak that into my writer's tips.
Yeah, yeah, and both ways work. It just depends on the person, right? Which is the great thing
Right.
about it. There's no wrong way to do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly, exactly. I actually, in my coaching, I call this the dopamine sandwich technique. Dopamine being one of the kind of brain hormones that we produce when we complete something or do a good job. And so I like to start my day with a quick win, so I'm feeling good about myself and capable. Then I'll move into that really chunky, more tricky task. And then when I finish that, I also save myself another fun little thing that I can kind of look forward to as I do the difficult thing. And putting I know it might sound like overly simple or almost whimsical to some people, but putting like a treat for yourself on both sides of whatever is your most difficult thing, I find that it really frees me up from that procrastination struggle.
Well, that's a great way to stay motivated. I've talked about that on the channel and how the small wins or a little reward at the end of your project or whatever, it always helps to keep you motivated, and enjoying what you do is the biggest thing. And I can tell by just everything about you that you enjoy copywriting for the business that you love. So, have you ever had any projects that it was like, I don't know anything about this, but then at the end of the day, you really enjoyed the research and the writing?
Oh my gosh, yes. That is actually one of my favorite things about what I do. As a copywriter, it's common to have what's called a niche, which is very similar to a genre in terms of writing a book. It's kind of the audience or the type of thing that you're writing towards. And it's good to have one of those as a copywriter, but there's nothing stopping you from branching out into other things. So I've written for everything from a rodeo to a public utility contractor in New York, that's putting up light poles and all those kinds of things. I've written for coaches, for therapists, all kinds of people. And what's really enjoyable about it is you can approach it the same way that you would almost approach writing a new book or exploring a new story idea. It just kind of comes to you. You might not know much about it, but you use your own sort of intuition and your own interests and passions to guide you towards things that are intriguing to you. I can say that just kind of following my heart in that way, if that makes sense, has led me to never doing any work that I've thought, wow, this is boring. That doesn't happen. I find it always so fun and interesting.
That's wonderful. I had years ago, I would write for different online platforms, and I had some really boring things. Education wasn't too bad, but there was some that, but then I had some fun ones. And a lot of those articles now you can find on my website. But I've been doing freelance writing for a long time and I love it. I don't do a lot of copywriting. I mean, I do build some websites and stuff for people, and sometimes I'll clean their stuff up or edit it out or make it sound a little more interesting when they send me just the facts. But I think it's a wonderful thing that you do. So, your tips or tricks now are to start with something fun, sandwich your more difficult writing tasks or tasks between fun projects and to branch out, to be curious and to explore and use your intuition. Do you have anything else about structuring your day or time management that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, for time management, absolutely. To be completely forthcoming, and I think that's important here. Back about 6 months ago, my husband came to me and said, I love everything you're doing. I am so proud of you, but I miss you. I miss the things that we used to do. We used to eat lunch together every single Wednesday, things like that. We lived together, we cooked dinner together, but I had lost a lot of what was driving me to even pursue this. One of the joys of freelancing and being your own boss is that you can, call the shots, make your own rules. And so that was a really good wake up call for me that I needed. And after I had gotten that, I looked back and realized I'm not structuring my time really. I kind of sit down, I start working, and when I reach, honestly the point of mental exhaustion each day, I thought, "Okay, that's it. We're done for the day. We've done enough." Now I am much more intentional about it and everyone is happier, myself included, my brain included. So I carve out time dedicated, marked out on my calendar every weekend, a little bit to work on my own business and a little bit to work on other writing pursuits, like my fictional novel, things like that. And setting these kind of harder stop times and truly setting this time on my calendar, I can't believe what a difference it's made. Seeing that accountability in front of you has to be experienced to be believed, I think, because it wasn't until I tried it that I went, wow, I can see how many hours I'm working and how much time I'm not spending with my family. I want to change that.
That's wonderful. I really believe in the work-life balance. I remember when I started years and years ago, I would write early mornings, late nights, weekends, but I always took time, like my husband worked nights and I worked days. So when he'd leave, they'd give me some time in the evenings. Or vice versa. If he worked days and I was on nights, I had time. I always loved working evenings, 2:30 to 11, because he was at work, the kids were at school, so I had some time during the day, get the house cleaned, and had a couple hours during the day to do my writing. But it's something that you have to do when you have a family, and I love the idea that even being more structured helps you get more accomplished.
Exactly. That's what really has blown me away. The idea that being more intentional with my time could have such an impact. People have told me that for a long time. I've heard this tip so many times over the years, and I'm just trying to be grateful that I've found it now, better late than never, instead of kicking myself
Right.
for not doing it sooner.
I hear you. Well, that's good. It's good to encourage people, carve out the time and stick with the time. And when life gets in the way, just let life do what it's got to do and then just get back in the saddle or get back to the project. I know when I'm actively working on a fiction or a nonfiction project, that's usually the first thing I do. I have my morning, my coffee and study time or prayer time or whatever. Then I write and then I walk. Or, depending on the time of the year, sometimes I go walk way early, go walk at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, get that out of the way, and then I kind of schedule things. And I found that, just depends on what kind of mood I'm in, how fast things move, and how much I get accomplished. I might get 5 things accomplished in one day that, like this past week, I did a newsletter, I did a blog post, I scheduled another blog post, and then I worked on taxes. So I had a lot of little things completed. And I love that. Once you get that one or two things completed, you always feel like it's not piling up on you anymore. So
Exactly.
you said something about a fiction project. So are you telling me that copywriters can write fiction novels as well?
Well, I will say that I am still in the process, but so far so good. I think the proof is in the pudding. And it's been really interesting to see kind of how those things line up. Best writing for copywriting, for nonfiction, and for fiction. I'm not going to say that one person who's great at one is going to automatically be a New York Times bestseller in the other two. But there's so much that carries over, absolutely. Like one of my favorites, for example, is show, don't tell. And that's great advice for anything you're writing. An example kind of from my world is you might be on a website, say that's for parents, and it'll just say, being a parent is so hard. And that's true, but it doesn't really paint a picture, right? Something that's
Right.
more along the lines of feeding troubles, all-nighters, the endless laundry. But at least he smiles when I change his diaper, right? That makes it all worth it. It's a completely different kind of setting, and I think that
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, and mixing research, yes, is good, but with a little bit of empathy and your own lived experience to really tap into real emotions, no matter what you're writing. That's just one example of something that carries over into, I think, all realms, no matter what you're sitting down to write.
I love that example. Well, I'm gonna just kind of wrap this up, see if they have anything else that you want to share. You are giving us a document that listeners can download. They'll give them some of these tips and tricks and examples that you talked about. I will have information in the show notes on how to find you and how to reach you in your school community and all that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
I think the last thing I'd like to say, and it's a little bit broad, but I feel it's appropriate here, is that one of my favorite mantras is the word should is not real. Anytime you're telling yourself, I should be doing this, I should have gotten more done today, that's coming from somewhere else. That's a rule that you or someone in your life has created due to you feeling any, range of emotions really. And
Right.
so anytime you catch yourself, no matter what it's about, saying, I should or I shouldn't, kind of pause and think about where that's coming from and see if you can unpack it. Because anytime you can really tap into your emotions like that, I think it not only makes you a stronger writer, but it just makes you feel more connected to everything you're doing.
I love that. Well, that's the perfect place to end. Thank you, Shelby. Well, I hope you enjoyed this interview with Shelby Dennis. And like I said, there will be information in the show notes on how to reach her and how to find her. And she will have a document for us to download. If you enjoy the content of A Novel Lunch, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. If you'd like to support A Novel Lunch, there's links for that in the show note. And if you'd like to work with me one-on-one as an editor or book formatter or consultant, my email is in the show notes as well. Until next time, write happy.